Use this opportunity to make a quick note. As you all know, I'm from Israel. I think I'm the only Israeli representative here. So just making a quick reference to what was said in the morning by the Iranian ambassador. I think he mentioned the Balfour Declaration as a letter that invented the country. I just wanted to make a quick reminder that actually it was the Persians who made a precedent by the Cyrus Declaration, 5 BC, a letter that the Persian king wrote acknowledging the Jews' connection to the land of Judea. So the British only followed this example, I think. Now, hopefully they will find my presentation soon. I was told in the morning that it is there. But till they will find it, just to say that my presentation is actually is somewhat continuation to the brilliant presentation we just heard by Dr. Ludwig. I just wanted to say that this was a brilliant planning. That I was planned to talk just after that presentation, because really these are a few thoughts following the critical remarks that we just heard. Do we have it? No. Yeah, we finally got the notes. So as I started to say, this is almost chapter B, following Dr. Ludwig presentation. We can almost, maybe we should write a book together. And
why not?
So I'm going to discuss today what seemed to be developing as an idea, as an alternative to the concept of counterinsurgency. That kind of swept the Western militaries during or following the invasions to Iraq and to Afghanistan, I'm going to argue that this idea is raiding, and raiding. I'm not saying something new. I believe definitely those who have military background know and understand what is raiding. But I would like to explore a bit and elaborate a bit the concept and it's the way military institutions understand it today. And to also point out the advantages and disadvantages in using this concept. So what brings us to the idea of raiding? So first of all, what we see, and this was also mentioned in the presentation yesterday and today, is an interest in ungoverned areas, ungoverned zones. We experienced the low return on investment or the failure of what we call the heavy footprint counterinsurgency campaigns, those ones who were that were carried out, as I said, in Afghanistan and Iraq, and also in conjunction, another trend, which is the weakening of the post-Cold War order and the will of strong states, developed states, states with capacity to reach out and to fix the world. So this motivation is being degraded. Now this slide is a direct quote from the UN Fragile State Index, formerly the Failed State Index. I don't know, maybe they changed the name from political correctness reason or some other reason, but this is how they call themselves today. They indicate that those areas are used as safe havens, as they are as launching pad, as breeding ground, whatever you call it, for terrorism, weapons proliferation, crime, energy insecurity, etc., etc. This is the map that they provide with the world divided by this index. The red area, the strong red area, are those countries who are basically under the title of failed states. You can see the list of those who are in the bottom of the list, basically. This list includes, not surprisingly, countries like South Sudan, which was not invaded. It includes countries that were invaded, and a lot of resources went into trying to fix them, like Iraq and Afghanistan and other countries. You can go to the website yourself and obviously have a look at it. So the idea of COIN, of counterinsurgency, revolved around, and we mentioned the names of some of the thought leaders who led this kind of thinking. Among them was General Petraeus, or maybe the most prominent one was General Petraeus. By the way, General Matisse was also involved in developing the counterinsurgency, the American counterinsurgency doctrine. The ideas were about winning hearts and minds of the population, people-centric counterinsurgency, meaning that the occupying forces, they have first and foremost to secure the population, clear, hold, and build. Mainly after you secure the area, you help to create new institutions and to build a nation. And the references were often referred to the success in Germany and Japan after the Second World War, two countries that were completely devastated, and there was a foreign intervention, and there was a tremendous success in building new institutions. The quote that you see here is from a cult movie from the Vietnam, from the 80s, but the movie is on the Vietnam era. This is a Marine sergeant, and he's instructing, he's explaining his private what is their mission in Vietnam and why they are there. And he's saying to him, inside every Vietnamese there is an American yearning to be freed. So we are there to free those Vietnamese and make them Americans. And I can only agree more with some of with my colleagues' comments yesterday, that the Americans and the West is not always welcome in these areas, and the area just wanted to be left alone. So why raiding? So if we are to leave the idea behind, to leave the idea of counterinsurgency, so we are not there to send big forces in order to fix the place, and these are ungoverned zones, although there are people who will say they are governed. They are governed by the local tribes, the local leaders, the head of the terrorist groups. So they are governed, but they are not governed by a state apparatus as we know it. And we don't have any means of political or economic leverage. If we do, we prefer to use those. And understanding that if we have an ambitious political objective, they are not attainable. So we have to be modest about our objective. So what we can aspire is to degrade our enemy's abilities and creating some form of deterrence, attempting to somehow weaken our enemies, and equipping ourselves with a lot of patience, knowing that this is a problem that we cannot solve. There is a famous historian, a military historian, his name is Archer Jones, and he said that all strategies are divided, could be divided into two categories, two major categories. One is persistent and one is raiding, meaning that this is about your strategic intent. It doesn't matter how long you stay in a certain area. It matters what do you want to do with this area. If you want to colonize it, if you want to occupy it for other means, you want to stay, to create a permanent base there, then the strategy is persistent. But if you want just to go in, do whatever, and go out, then your strategy is a persistent one. So raiding the strategy is a raiding one. So there is a room for a raiding strategy. It's not only, as sometimes military people think about it, as a small operation that, you know, to capture this or to gain some intelligence, a small unit goes in, go out. No, it's more than that. And therefore we talk about, when we refer today to raiding, we talk about strategic raids. What is a strategic raid? it's not about how, what the size of the force or what is the configuration of the force. It's about what's the impact of the force. What is the impact of the force? What kind of impact it will create on your adversary? And then we come to the question whether we use small specialized forces or large regular forces. Obviously, before that, we have to talk about air raids, because once we had air power, we can use air power. We don't need to use ground forces necessarily. But sometimes ground forces have their advantages. For example, in the case of the Osama bin Laden raid, the Americans had to use Navy SEALs. They could drop, I mean, they had two options, right? They could drop a bomb on the compound, and they had to, or they could use Navy SEALs. Why did they use the Navy SEALs? Why did they use the Navy SEALs? Does anyone has an idea why? Instead of dropping a bomb on the compound. Yeah, so one strong explanation is that you want to make sure, okay, well, first of all, we can say, you know, they were not sure of women and children. Well, we know that sometimes they wanted to make sure that this is the guy. Someone had to make sure to have, exactly. The other explanation is, which this is the rational, probably this was the explanation, but the other explanation I heard from some American who said, look, it had to end with a duel between a Navy SEAL and Osama bin Laden. It had to end face-to-face duel. So the American, you know, like in the old Western film, it had some psychological effect that in the end there was an American soldier facing Osama bin Laden, face-to-face, looking in the white in the eye, and taking him down. Okay, and this has an effect. This has an effect. So this comes to the last point in my slide: M16 or F16. Okay, sometimes the F16 has that advantage. Now it's not only from this psychological point of view and propaganda point of view, but also from the point of view of sometimes you need to go with ground forces. Ground forces, and I don't have time to go into it, but ground forces has their own advantages over using only drones and air raids. Being in the place, in the area, has a very clear impact and have some very substantial advantages, and you have to weigh the options which military people know how to do. I hope so. Maybe I'm not so sure after the forum presentation. So you can go also with light forces, small specialized forces, as I said, and also with larger forces. A raid can be, we think about a raid as, again, special forces, but a raid, if you send a battalion of tanks or a tank brigade with infantry, and it goes into an area, and it goes out from the area after a few hours, after a few days, after a week. But again, the intention is to go in, to go out. This is also a raid. Many historical examples. Don't have time to go into all of them, but if you read the Peloponnesian War, the Spartans used a raiding strategy against the Athenians. Rome had a stated raiding. Rome decided not to expand beyond the Rhine River in Germany, and from that point beyond, they didn't occupy the area, they just used the raiding. The Byzantines, one of the Byzantines' ancient texts, they say, replace the battle of attrition and occupation of countries with lightning strikes and offensive raids to disrupt enemies, followed by rapid withdrawals. Britain in the Afghan border and the Americans' expedition to Mexico in 1916 are other examples. It has a strategic and political dimension if you use raiding. Basically, it is to maintain the status quo, not to change it fundamentally. Not aiming into getting into an agreement. Or, on the other hand, it's not about annihilation. It's not about surrender. You're not going to see any pictures of signing surrender like in the end of the Second World War. Your goals are very unambitious. On the upside, it is limited in time and resources. It's very easy to gain, or easier to gain, domestic and international legitimacy when you do raiding, because you tell your audience that this is for limited time, a limited objective, And again, the resources, the cost is lower. So low risk, low gains, no victories, need to set expectations. And again, we were talking about the whole theory of victory and what is victory today. What you can get is degrade enemy capability and, as I said, achieve deterrence. Force design, you have to make sure that your force design is structured for raiding. You have to have excellent intelligence, otherwise you strike the air. Dusting pound operations, as we used to call the American bombardments, using Tomahawk missiles at empty compounds of the Al-Qaeda during the 90s, anyone who remembers. Dusting pound operation. You don't know where the enemy is. The enemy today is what we call a disappearing enemy. He is fighting in an asymmetric war. He will not show up. Forget about the set piece battle. It's all about guerrilla warfare. So you need an excellent intelligence, combined arm maneuver, move fast, hit hard, strike capabilities. ISR also can be very helpful in this type of war. If you do expeditionary forces, which what the West does, Britain, France, the US, of course, then you have a problem with logistics and how to be able to transport those forces very quickly to areas of crisis. Therefore, you need short-term readiness and the ability, of course, the capacity to move them. Sometimes today, the solution for that is light airborne forces, like the 82nd Division, the Americans on 101st, 16th Assault Brigade, the UK. The problem is with some of the rivals, the enemies that we see, some of our opponents that we see developing today. They're what we call hybrid enemies. They are well equipped, so they have high capabilities, and they use anti-tank weapons, sophisticated system, anti-aircraft weapons. Obviously, the use of a lot of explosive ID, tunnels, as we saw in Mosul. Sometimes, in those cases, you need much more than just light forces. You need heavy armor, you need some tanks, you need supporting artillery, and so on. The problem of the disappearing enemy, I'm just bringing you a quote, is not new. Episode that most people are a bit unaware of is Moshe Dayan, General Moshe Dayan. For those of you who remember him, he spent some time in Vietnam in 1966 as an observer. He joined some reconnaissance of the Rangers and the 101st and the US cavalry that was using the new method of the helicopters. And this is what he said in one of the operations. When they went down to the operation, he wrote, "One small item is missing. No one knows exactly where are the positions of the Viet Cong battalions. The air photos and air reconnaissance failed to pick out the Viet Cong's encampment, entrenched, bunkered, and camouflaged position that merged with the jungle vegetation." So this is not new. Now, just a few short notes on Israel's situation. This is Israel, and if you look around Israel today from a strategic perspective, there is not even one border. Maybe the only border is with the PLA, by the way, which is not fully full state today, but the border with the PLA in the West Bank and the border with Jordan as well are borders which are areas which are under control by their legitimate governments. All the other areas, if you look at Lebanon, we have the Hezbollah. If you look at Syria, it's al-Nusra on the Golan Heights on the border with Israel. If you look at Sinai, it's Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda Sinai, which the Egyptians are combating, but every now and then they are trying also to penetrate the Israeli border or to fire rockets into Israel. And Hamas in Gaza, which is also an unrecognized state. Although de facto Hamas is kind of a mini state. Gaza is kind of a mini state controlled by Hamas. So if you look at the trend, Israel's trend I would argue is not very, and Israel's experience is not very different than what we see, what we saw in the experience of the Western intervention in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places. Israel had a sour experience of trying to control areas with foreign population. So in Lebanon, it went out in 1995 to the security zone inside Lebanon. In Oslo, it gave up areas A and B. In 95, in Lebanon 2000, it also evacuated the security zone, so it went out of Lebanon completely, following the resistance of the Hezbollah and the difficulties it had to maintain itself. Security barrier 2003, also to separate Israel from the West Bank, or most of the West Bank. And then the Gaza disengagement in 2005. So if you are looking at it in this way, there is a series of withdrawals, of Israeli withdrawals, following difficulties in maintaining control over population that resisting its presence there. Now, in terms of what the Israeli response today is also somewhat familiar with, or similar in the same lines as we see in the emerging in other Western countries. But in the IDF, raiding is a long-standing tradition since it was founded. And it comes from the Israeli security doctrine. I don't have time to, of course, to talk about it. But if we look only from 2002, we see a series of raiding, basically, a big operation of raiding, and then also there's small raiding. And in between those activities, there are also a lot of what we call the campaign, what the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, call it the campaign between the campaigns. So it's all the activity between those eruptions of violence, of big operations. So all the activity that is conducted between the campaigns, which is basically small raidings. Small series of raiding. So this is military power in the age of raiding. I actually this is a quote from a colleague, Patrick Porter, Professor Patrick Porter, who is originally Australian and now he's teaching in a British university. I just found like 2-3 weeks ago he made a lecture he lectured to the British MOD, British Ministry of Defense. And this was the title of his presentation, Military Power in the Age of Raiding. I can quote it because I wrote and published what I'm presenting now already in November. It came out in the Chatham House paper, International Affairs, and I think you have a copy in your folders. So this is what he says. Patrick Porter says that the age of access denial, multipolarity, and redistribution of power, what you do is raiding and disruption. Now what he says is what the other side is doing to us is raiding and disruption. So what we need to do as well is raiding and disruption. Now we have to understand that not every problem has a solution. Wicked problems, there is a lot of literature on wicked problems in the social sciences, those problems that you can somehow manage, you can somehow decrease, but you cannot solve. And military power should not serve for political solutions, solving and eliminating problems, nor influence or for the transformation of all nations, but military power should serve for defense, deterrence, and disruptions. So this is to conclude my last slide. Disintegration of states provide launching pads for terrorists. There are no once and for all solutions. We're not going to solve it by a silver bullet. And raids is a way to curbing the threat at a minimum risk and cost, but it also has its shortcomings as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shamir.